Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me on this episode of the Show About the Show podcast. Today, I am very happy to be joined by former Major League player and Minnesota Twin, and one of my favorites growing up, Todd Walker. He was the second baseman and third baseman in the major leagues. He's played in the postseason. He's come up with some big hits. He's in the College Baseball Hall of Fame and has his number retired by LSU. We'll get to all that. Todd, how are you doing?
Great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. Hey, we had the MLB draft this past weekend, and your alma mater, LSU, did really well. You had Paul Skeens and Dylan Cruz drafted 1 and 2. What's that like, not just for you as an alumni, but what does that say about LSU as a program?
We live in a world now where players can travel around the country without penalty. So they can move around the country. Everybody in the country wants to play in the SEC, and more specifically, they want to play for LSU. And so you're going to start seeing these type of trends until they put the penalty back in place, where LSU had 13 players drafted off their team this year. That's unheard of, and a special deal for those kids. But it shows you how talented they were this year. And of course, they won the national championship. In addition, like you mentioned, record, it's never happened before. 2 players from the same team get drafted 1 and 2. Paul Skeens goes to Pittsburgh and Dylan Cruz goes to the Washington Nationals. Both 2 of the best players in the country, and they're going to do really well. Paul Skeens may be in the big leagues this year, who knows, but Dylan Cruz isn't far behind. But pretty cool deal for the city of Baton Rouge and the program at LSU.
Absolutely. Now you're an SEC. You're on the SEC network. You're very close, obviously, to LSU. What can you tell fans who may not be college baseball fans about Paul Skeens specifically? I've heard terms thrown out like generational talent. I've seen things that he's the best college prospect ever, besides Ben McDonald, Mark Pryor, and Strasburg.
Well, Paul Skeens is special. And like I said, he's big league ready right now. He throws 102 miles an hour with movement. So it used to be when you threw high velocity fastballs, you had to give up the fact that you're going to be able to move it around. Late life, they call it, whatever you want to call it. He's got it. And then he's got the wipeout slider. There was a game in Omaha where he decided to throw the changeup more than he had done before. And he was pinning that thing on the arm side part of the plate. So away from lefties into right-handers, and he was very accurate with that as well. So he knows how to pitch. He's got those 3 primary pitches, and and ultimately thinks along with the hitter. So that's the toughest part. As a hitter, you can go up and you can think along with the pitcher. Obviously, you have an advantage. But for him, he'll drop that changeup on you in a 2-0 count when you think a fastball is coming. He'll drop the slider at any count, and so he's just a premier pitcher, and the number 1 pick in the country. So it shows you how talented this kid is.
Does what you just talked about, kind of maybe keeping the hitter guessing, is that more of a mental thing? Is that something the pitcher and catcher talk about, like, hey, let's mix it up? Or is that just the pitcher going, okay, I recognize that I've been throwing this pitch a lot. Let me try to keep him off guard with this pitch.
You clearly talk about scouting reports off of hitters, and then in turn, us as hitters, talk about the scouting reports on the pitchers and what their tendencies are. But it never really matters till you get in the box. And so if Paul Skeens throws the first pitch fastball and I'm a left-handed hitter and I rip it foul down the left field line, meaning I'm late, well, then clearly the next pitch needs to be another fastball in. You throw a changeup, you'll speed up his barrel, and then he'll be able to make contact. So that's the simplified version of what we're talking about. But you won't know that the hitter's late until you throw that first pitch. And so you go along with that type of sequence. And then in turn, as a hitter, I know the same thing. So I remember, I hit, I think it was a 2-0 fastball off Mussina in the playoffs in 2003 for a home run. Yep. So the next time I got into that position, he ain't throwing me another fastball. He's coming with a changeup, and he did do that, and I hit that one out. So I think that was a 2-1 count maybe. But point of the story is, you think along with the pitcher, and that gives you an advantage. I call it an educated guess as a hitter. So once you know kind of what they're going to throw, it's all percentages. You're never 100% sure, but if I can convince myself on this particular pitch that it's a high percentage he's going to throw a changeup, for example, then I'm going to sit on it. And if I'm wrong, you just have to have the the ability to take it and then move on. Now with two strikes, you don't have that luxury. So with two strikes, it becomes a different approach, meaning I'm just going to be defensive on 1-2 and 2-2 counts, for example, and I'm going to sit back on the changeups, react fastball, which is different than most hitting coaches will tell you to sit on the fastball, react change. But for me, if I did that, I'd be out on my front foot. So for me, with a 2-strike count, I always sat off speed. That gives me the ability to let the ball travel deeper. And then if they pump a fastball in there, then I just do the best I could to put it in play.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when you look at the Pirates as an organization, they've struggled. I think the last 10 to 15 years, they have probably the nicest ballpark in baseball in PNC. It's a beautiful park. They have Mitch Keller, who's kind of been a breakout guy this year. They've got David Bedar in the back end of their bullpen. Do you see Paul Skeens and Mitch Keller being their long-term 1 and 2?
Yeah, I mean, Paul Skeens is long-term, and he's going to pitch a long time in the big leagues. And it's incredible the Paul Skeens story coming over from 2 years. He had a 3-to-1 strikeout to walk ratio, probably weighed about, 25, 30 pounds less. Gets over to LSU in his 3rd year. He's got a 10-to-1 strikeout to walk ratio. And he gained the weight. And I mean, it just looks like a beast now. I did in that 1 year, but it was impressive. West pitched.
Well, I think we might be having some audio issues. I do apologize about that. We will get Todd back as quickly as we possibly can. Yep,
You there?
I'm here.
Okay,
Yep,
sorry.
go ahead.
So
No,
so
you're
anyway, Thatcher Hurd has the story where he just wants to get to be a better pitcher. So he came to LSU, and that's his reasoning behind that, is to get to the big leagues ultimately.
I put out that in promoting this episode that you did a lot of stuff with college baseball. Obviously, you were drafted by the Twins, and I put out and asked people if they wanted to ask some questions. And David Borden asked, based on your own draft experience, what advice would you give to draftees who sign with the Twins? What would benefit them the most as they transfer from amateur to pro baseball?
Well, you're going to have the wood bat in your hand, and sometimes for the first time in your life. But a lot of kids now use the wood bat in batting practice and certain other things. I didn't do that. So the first time I picked up a wood bat was in the Cape Cod League. And then the next time I did it was when I was in the big leagues, in pro ball. So that's an adjustment in itself,
Sure.
So I would say get used to the wood bat. Then you're going to be away from home in most cases. And if you're a high school kid that got drafted, it's going to be for the first time. And that's tough because you miss home, you miss family. And heaven forbid you have a girlfriend back home. That's going to be tough as well, just on your own. And for me, it was Fort Myers, Florida. I've never been down there before. Beautiful city, but it just wasn't home. And when you're 18 years old, having lived at home for 18 years, it's tough. And so that was an adjustment for me as well. Ultimately, you're going to be playing and facing big time talent every night in pro ball. I don't care if it's A ball or double A or whatever. You're going to be facing big time guys, and that's tough because you've got to get yourself ready to go every single day. As we know, baseball, you play every day, 7 days a week. You probably get 2 days off a month, and so you've got to be ready to go every day, and that's tough as well.
Let's talk a little bit about your draft experience. You were taken with the 8th pick in the first round of the 1994 amateur draft by the Twins. Obviously, the draft has changed a lot in nearly 30 years, but what was that experience like for you personally in terms of leading up to it? Did you have a lot of contact with the Twins? Did they come watch you? How did they let you know that they were going to draft you? Kind of take us through that day.
Well, clearly they watched me plenty in college. Marty Esposito was my scout. I believe that was his name. It's been 30 years now. But it was awesome. I mean, incredible opportunity, because when I left high school, I was drafted in the 51st round. Now they only have 20 rounds. I was drafted in the 51st round by the Texas Rangers. And everybody said, if you don't sign now, you're never going to get another chance. Sign now. So I had all of this pressure to sign out of high school. I didn't. I go to LSU, which was the best time of my life. And the greatest decision I've ever made to go to college as opposed to sign pro. And then 3 years later, I was the 8th overall pick, first round. So I made a massive jump in those 3 years, just in terms of development, getting a chance to go to class and go to school in college, get my degree eventually. And but that day was special. I mean, we were in Omaha. I remember me and Russ Johnson sitting in a room at the Embassy Suites, waiting on a phone call. I got the call from Minnesota. He gets the call from Houston, both of us in the first round, and it was a pretty special moment. And then when you actually sign and you see how much money they're going to give you, it was just crazy because I just come out of college, eating at McDonald's 3 times a day, and doing the best I could to scrape along. All of a sudden, I got $1 million, and so it was pretty cool. I bought my mom a car, and I think that's about. I bought myself a little Pathfinder back in the day, and that's about the only thing I did with all that. So pretty neat.
Absolutely. Now you obviously debuted in 1996 in August. You actually your debut was actually against the Brewers in County Stadium. The Twins ended up losing that game in extra innings. I believe Jose Parra might have been the losing pitcher in that game. You made your major league debut. You were 1 for 5. What do you remember? Not only about your first game in your major league debut, but did you have a moment where you were kind of standing maybe in the on deck circle or pregame and just kind of like soaking it all in? And then what was your first big league hit like?
It was unbelievable, and I remember most of it. I don't remember my very first at bat, which is weird. You'd think you'd remember your very first big league at bat, but you're right. I don't think I got a hit until about my 4th or 5th at bat in that game, and it was an 87 hopper to the shortstop that Mike Fetters broke my bat. Yeah, okay. Fetters broke my bat, and I hit it to Jose Valentin at short, and I beat it out. That was my first big league hit, 1 for 5 that day. The next day we faced a guy named Jeff D'Amico, if you remember that name. He was a big time prospect and a big dude for Milwaukee, and he was young at the time, but it's just a surreal experience. I remember in the cab on the interstate, you could see County Stadium from the interstate, and I remember looking over going, man, this is pretty cool right here. I mean, all my life I've worked to this moment to get a chance to play in the big leagues. And it was neat too because I was lucky, I think, because when I got there and we played those 3 games, it was late August, like you said. And so Milwaukee wasn't going anywhere. They weren't in the playoffs. So we probably had 4,000 or 5,000 people in the stands. Wasn't very packed. It felt like a summer ball game. And I was lucky in that regard because I didn't have to deal with what happened next, which is we go to Cleveland. And now Cleveland's packing it out every night with Manny Ramirez and David Justice and Jim Thome and all these, Roberto Alomar. I mean, ridiculous how good they were. So now the stadium's packed, and I remember specifically standing at third base and looking up and just being mesmerized by the whole deal, and to the point where they had to yell at me in the dugout, "Hey, there's a game going on. Pay attention." And it was dramatic, and that's dealing with crowds, dealing with that type of atmosphere was much different than my first 3 games in Milwaukee. So I got to get my feet wet a little bit for 3 games, and then we rolled it on into Cleveland, and that's tough too because I remember striking out and not being upset about it, and because I'm in the big leagues, and that was the wrong way to approach it. You've got to have some. I personally had to have some sort of mental energy to be mad enough about it to do something about it. But when you first get to the big leagues, it's all just amazing, and it's hard to keep your emotions intact.
What's probably the biggest thing that the average fan doesn't know about being a big leaguer off the field? We see a lot of warm-ups and pre-games, and some fans can watch batting practice or get on game or on-field access, but in terms of being off the field, whether it's the preparation, the working out, the hotel kind of stuff, like what's the one thing that most fans don't see about the off the field part of the game?
The working out's tricky because you go for 6 months, and including spring training, it's probably more like 7 or 8 months, in addition to just getting yourself ready. So clearly your body gets tired. So me and Matt Lawton would actually go work out after the games. So we play at 7 p.m., be done by 10:30 or 11, and we go work out after the games. That way you could rest and, of course, be ready to go the next day. Sure. But that was tough in itself, as you can imagine. And so we did that for a while, for a few years in Minnesota, but eventually I would just go do something right before the game, and it'd be clearly very light. But I felt like that also was kind of a warm up for me, to do some light workouts before the games. And we'd get to the ballpark at 3 o'clock. Some guys a lot earlier for a 7 o'clock game, and that's on the road. And so you don't actually have to be on the field till 5:10, 5:15, something like that for a 7 o'clock game. So if you got there at 3, you had plenty of time to do what you needed to do. And so, but I think the main thing is you're in a different city every 3 days. And I didn't know people in the cities that I were in. So my routine was I'd set an alarm for 10 a.m. I'd get up and eat something. I'd walk around the city, mall, down the road, whatever. I'd go back down around 2 o'clock, take a nap till about 3:30, 3 or 3:30, and then get to the field. So that was my routine. It seemed to work. At 7 o'clock, I felt better because the first few years of my career, I didn't know about the whole nap thing. And about 7:30, there were nights when I just was tired. And like I said earlier, you got to bring it every day, 110%. And if you get in that mode, then you're just not going to be able to compete with the best in the world. And so I had to figure out a routine that worked for me. And so the other thing too is in the minor leagues, we'd have 20 guys go eat lunch by themselves. I mean, together. We'd all go together. When you get to the big leagues, everybody starts separating and they're on their phones and they're doing their business deals and everybody's making a ton of money. And so there's a lot going on. And so you kind of get isolated in the big leagues a little bit, unless you make a very big effort. And the one effort we made, Aaron Boone and I would go eat breakfast together most mornings. And I lived with him when I first got traded over to Cincinnati. So he and I would hang out a little bit, but it still wasn't the same as like the minor leagues where, again, you had half or most of the team that would always be together.
I actually got in contact with you via one of your teammates that you just mentioned, Matt Lawton. And it's funny you bring his name up because in your major league debut, he actually went yard. Do you remember that?
In Milwaukee.
Yeah, Milwaukee.
I don't remember his at bats. I was so focused on my own situation, but I know that Matt hit a lot of home runs, and what a great player and a great friend he is. Still is. We talk a lot on the phone, and he's one of the friends that I made in big leagues that we still keep in contact, and just a great player and a great person.
Now, I think it's kind of maybe fair or unfair to talk about your relationship with Tom Kelly from a fan's point of view. It kind of seemed like Tom Kelly maybe had you in his doghouse because you were at that time in your career a little bit more of an offensive player than a defensive player, and he liked defense a lot more or as much as offense. Do you think that was the case? And what do you think happened there in terms of your relationship with TK?
Here's what I'll say. I played on a lot of teams, and that situation was not normal. Every other team I've ever been on was normal. That situation was not normal. And that's all I have to say about that.
Okay. All right. So when you're playing with the Twins, obviously you played in the Metrodome for your entire Twins tenure. What's it like being a middle infielder? Can you kind of tell fans what it's like being a middle infielder and trying to play on AstroTurf as opposed to natural grass? And I mean, in terms of like trying to get a second hop or maybe a long hop, what's the adjustment you have to make as a fielder on that compared, to the natural grass?
Well, back then there was the old turf, so it was hard. It was still hard. If the baseball caught a seam, it's still going to pop up on you. Now they've got the soft turf, where you're not going to get a bad hop. The only thing you're going to get is the top spin, heavy top spins that are coming at you quicker than they would otherwise. But the new turf they've got nowadays is special, and you can feel pretty relaxed as an infielder. The only thing, again, you got to get used to is the speed. But the old turf we played in the Metrodome, you could hit a ball right past second or short and get a triple. It depended on where the outfield was playing, because the ball just flies through that infield and gets all the way to the wall. So I think Christian Guzman,
right through
you may know more than me, but he hit like 15 triples, 20 triples when he could fly. But I mean, he hit those ground balls through the infield that get all the way to the wall through the gap. So So anyway, it was a different turf back then. And there were a lot of grass fields back then as well, and dirt. And so some of the dirt fields, like Synergy Field, was dirt, yeah, but they had it so well manicured that it played like the new turf now, which was a soft infield. When I played in Wrigley, the grass would kind of be a little higher. People think that it's easy to hit in Wrigley because they see the balls flying out all the time, the wind blowing out. It was tough because the gaps are shorter. The grass was higher, the wind was swirling and blowing all over the place. And so if you didn't hit a line drive in Wrigley, you're out. Unless, of course, the wind's blowing out, which it didn't all the time. Half the time it blew in. Then you had no chance unless you really crushed it. But when the wind was blowing out, inevitably I'd try to get a little more launch on my swing path, and I'd hit 4 ground balls, right? And so when the wind was blowing in, I'd play normal, and then I'd hit the ball in the air and it'd get caught. I'd hit it. I'd give it all I got, and it'd get caught. But Wrigley was tough. Gaps were shorter, and you had to hit a line drive to get a base hit because the ground balls wouldn't get through the infield really either. That was back then. I don't know how it plays now, but it was tough. Go back to the Metrodome. It was a good place to hit right field. I always felt like Fenway was fit better for me because I was a left-handed hitter and I needed a little help the other way. So with those short wall in left field at Fenway, I miss-hit some balls that hit that wall, but if you miss-hit the ball in the Metrodome, you're out in left field. But so I didn't need help to the full side. If you get it, it's going to go, no matter where you're at. So I always felt like Fenway was a better fit for me. And I don't know how the numbers played out, but I always felt more comfortable in Fenway. But Metrodome was a good place to hit. The only thing I would say is the depth perception was weird. So like most outdoor parks, now I think they've got way more indoor places than they did back then. You go play on the road for 10 days, you come back inside, and the depth perception was very difficult to get used to as a hitter. And so I'd have a little longer swing, I felt like, and tried to quit, try to be real quick, and just harder to see and react. And you had to kind of get used to it for a few days. But other than that, the turf was nice, and the ball, there wasn't any wind blowing in at you to worry about. So the ball typically carried there too.
I talked to Maddie during our podcast episode, and I asked him kind of a similar question, and he said the toughest games for him to play in the Metrodome weren't night games. They were day games when it was kind of overcast or it was really, really bright and sunny, because that roof kind of, it kind of mixed in, and it was like a cream color, and you could kind of lose it in the lights. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I don't remember losing any that came to me. I remember it looked like if they hit them out in the outfield, you kind of you knew they got it. You had to see the trajectory of the ball and how hard they hit it off the bat to kind of get an idea, even if you did lose it, of where it was going to end up. I remember Jim Thome hit a ball so far that I knew when it cracked the bat, it was gone. But I didn't know. I lost it. Didn't know where it went. And those banners in right field, way up in top, probably would have left the stadium if there wasn't a roof on top. I see a banner just kind of ruffle, it just kind of, it hit the banner, and it had to have been a 500-foot home run. I mean, it was nuts. But I lost that one. Never saw it until it hit the banner. But there are a few times when it is the exact color of the baseball, and the ball would drop. That's nice as a hitter because you get a cheap base hit out of it. But
right.
I don't remember it happening a crazy amount, and I do remember we practiced it a lot, but you had to pay specific attention to when the ball was made contact, at home plate, or you would lose it. So I think that was the trick there, is just watching the contact and really be in. And that leads into what I've always said, at that level, errors aren't made by just the lack of ability to make the play. It's that your mind wanders through 4 hours and 9 innings, that eventually you start thinking about other things or whatever, and it's human nature to do that. And then the ball's hit at you, and then you get the short hop, like you said, or something a little tough, and you're not ready for it. So I think that's part of the defensive part of it, is just staying in on every pitch. And I think I learned that from the Metrodome, is really watching the ball off the bat every pitch. And you can imagine how hard that is for 4 hours.
Absolutely. I ask every Twins player that I have on this. I asked Matt, and he had a great one. Do you have a Kirby Puckett story that you can share, even if it's a little spicy?
Matt and Kirby were pretty close. So I'm sure Matt Lawton has a ton of great stories on Kirby Puckett. I just love being around him. I remember when we got to spring training, I got a couple stories. I remember when I got to spring training for the first time, he was loud and he was, he was the guy you always see, behind closed doors as he was out in front of the fans. He was awesome. Great personality guy, And I remember he was always wearing those breathe rights on his
Yeah, the
nose
nose strips,
because he wanted to get a contract with Breathe Right, So he always was wearing these things on his nose and constantly talking about they're going to pay me. And he loved them. And it was kind of funny, how. But I remember through that moment, I was like, wow, anything this guy does is going to attract attention. And I get why people would want to pay him to do stuff like that, And so, and again, the personality was off the charts, just awesome person. But I also remember he had shown up probably a few days before we actually started camp. Pitchers get there early, pitchers, catchers. So I would get there early because I was a rookie, first year guy. But he didn't show up till later, In fact, I don't even know if he took any swings before we played this college team. The college teams would come down and play our big league team back then. I don't know if they Boston College, for example. And he gets to the plate, and I don't know if he's even swung the bat in 4 months, off season, whatever. And this college kid throws him a fastball. He hit it dead center, home run. First pitch he saw probably in 4 months. And I remember thinking how quick his swing is to be able to lay off that long and not have to deal with the timing of everything. And we all know how special a player he was, but he was a special person as well.
Yeah, I talked to Mike Trombley. I had him on the podcast a few years ago, and there's an infamously hilarious story that Trombley shares about getting his first paycheck and sitting at his locker looking at it, and Puckett walked by and saw it and asked and pulled out a wad of cash and said, "Hey, Trom, you want me to cash that for you?"
My story is I remember Chuck Knobloch showing me his check from you get paid every 2 weeks, I think. And now you can spread it out through the year. I think they do a better job of kind of, allowing you to do that. But back then you got it all bundled up in 6 months and 2 weeks, every 2 weeks. I think Chuck was making 6 or 7 million at the time. So you can do the math. Whatever that 2-week check was, I was like, wow, this is worth getting in the cage and getting after it and setting your life up. We knew we had a unique opportunity for a short period of time. And so you wanted to take advantage of it. And for me, I just remember him showing me that check. And that was quite a big motivation for me to hang in there. And I did for 10 years, 12 years. I think my actual time was 10 years, but I was very blessed to get an opportunity to do that for that long a period of time.
So after your Twins tenure, or when your Twins tenure ended, the Twins traded you to the Rockies in 2000. You played there for a while, and then you went to Boston in 2003, and you ended up making the playoffs. And you guys ended up hitting 3 home runs in the ALDS that year against Oakland, and 2 more against the Yankees in the CS. You mentioned that home run against Mussina. Can you talk about, for fans who just maybe can't watch it on TV, we can feel the intensity of playoff baseball coming through our screens, but being a player on the field in that environment, especially when it's Boston, New York, or a historic franchise like that, can you talk about what that environment's actually like?
Wow. I mean, I don't know how long this podcast is, but I've got special memories from that whole run. I mean, it was well, hey, look, it was incredible. And by the way, so the quick story is I'd go to AAA for Minnesota and Salt Lake City. I think the one year I hit 328 with 28 home runs, 111 RBIs, something crazy like that. Get to the big leagues, get sent down. I got sent back down, told them, all right, I'll go back to AAA and do what I do, but it's not helping me become a better player in the big leagues. Hit 345 the next year, I got sent down. So eventually you get sent down enough, it's time to move on. So I got traded over to Colorado under Buddy Bell, who was awesome. Loved playing for Buddy Bell. And they moved Mike Lansing out of there. I played second base at Colorado, had a fabulous time there. Eventually moved to Cincinnati and then Boston. So we get to Boston. I remember thinking, now we're talking big time. Now you're in the big time of baseball, and it has cut the legs out from a lot of people, and it's made other players better. And I got in a lineup that was special. I mean, we had Billy Miller hitting eighth, I think, that year. He won the batting title. Jason Veritek hit ninth. So it was, the lineup was Johnny Damon, me, Nomar Garciaparra, Manny Ramirez, David Ortiz, Kevin Millar, Trot Nixon. I think if we didn't set records, we were up there with, you know, the early the Yankees of the 20s, you know, 1927, I think, in run production. And so it was a special offense. So, you know, I was lucky enough to be a part of that. But that year, 2003, was pretty cool. I mean, so we roll through it. We get in the wild card. I think they had a 3-run homer off Baltimore late in the game to tie it. David Ortiz hits a home run to win it. That puts us in the wild card. We get to the playoffs. We're playing Oakland, like you mentioned. We're down 0-2 before we can blink. We went over there and played a night-day game. Got beat on a bunt with 2 outs on the night game. Had to roll it over less than 24 hours. Got beat again. Go back home to Boston down 0-2 and win the next 3. So we won the 2 in Boston. Go back to Oakland for Game 5. Barry Zito's pitching. Beat him. And now I remember thinking, we're about to play the Yankees. Are you kidding me? Like, I don't have enough playoff experience to have to deal with this, you know, but it's Boston, New York, and the ALCS. I mean, I just remember I need some help here, because this is, you know, so a lot of prayer went into that series.
It doesn't get better than that as a fan.
As a player, I didn't know what to think. I was like, I don't know if, you know, this exposure is off the charts. We know the Buckner stories. And so we're up against the Yankees. We win Game 1, and we were kind of we had lost Johnny Damon because he collided with Damian Jackson, and so Johnny was out. And so I think I led off to start that series. I can't remember, but we win Game 1, lose Game 2, go to Boston, lose 2 of 3. So we come back to New York, having to win both of them, and won Game 6. So now we're in Game 7 of the 2003 ALCS, and I think Roger Clemens started. I got a base hit to start. I remember we were up 5-1, 4-1. I think it was 5-1. They start climbing back. That's the whole story with Pedro was up there in the pitch count. He was our best guy, and so Grady Little left him out there, and I didn't think twice about that. I didn't know his pitch count, which was 120 something at the time, but he was our best guy. And then Jorge Posada gets jammed out of his mind in the center field. It lands right between Nomar, Johnny, and I, and ties the game at 5. And then we go to the extras. I remember, and then the backstory is I hit a triple. So I had 5 home runs in that postseason, and I faced Mariano Rivera a lot in that series, but I faced him in Fenway. And the approach against Mariano, you know it's coming. It's a cutter in on the lefties. And so I just got to get my swing going earlier, like get it started before he even lets the ball go. And I did that in Fenway, and I connected, and I hit the as small as that wall is in right field in Fenway, I hit the wall. So I got a triple off of should have been out, would have been my 6th home run of the series, or the postseason, but it hit the wall. I get a triple. Fast forward to Game 7, we're in extra innings, 5-5. Millar had hit Mariano Rivera well, like he hits him well. He had a double or whatever it was. He's on second, and I'm up. And I thought, the first thought I had was, I'm going to back off the plate because he throws those cutters in. Let's get it, try to get inside of me now. And he throws a backdoor. Well, he'd jam everybody. So he throws a backdoor cutter for strike 1 that was so far away from me that I had to move back into my normal position because he pinned it on the outside corner, strike 1. I'm like, all right. So then I get back up in the box, and then here he comes with the cutters in. And I felt like I did the same thing, like start your swing early, get the barrel out, you know what's coming, just be quick enough, you know. And he jammed me just enough that I hit it right at Soriano, and he caught it for the 3rd out, I believe. But I felt like I took the same swing as that triple that I hit at Fenway. Didn't work out. They come up, of course, Wakefield comes in the game. Aaron Boone, who didn't even play, he got put in for defensive replacement. His part in the order comes up, I believe. First pitch off Wakefield, hits it out. And we thought whoever won that game would win the World Series because you're facing the Marlins. But, you know, we had both taxed each other so much in 7 games of the ALCS. I think the Yankees rotation was out of whack going against the Marlins. So the Marlins, of course, win the World Series in 2003. But what a series, man. And again, I remember standing out there at second base in extra innings thinking, I'm going to catch this ball with my teeth. before it's going to go up under me, because, you know, you see Buckner signs everywhere. And as unfair as that may be, it was a real thing. And so I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. So when you said how great it got, I was out there going, this is tough, man. This is tough. And so I made a few nice plays at second base, one up, diving up the middle against Bernie Williams, another one off Soriano in the second. So I was able to focus down enough to hang in there in that extra inning deal. And then, of course, Aaron hits the home run. They go to the World Series. But I got plenty of other stories on that deal. But, man, that was one of the more exciting after the fact. Now, yes, I was like you. Now I look back and going, that was pretty cool.
Was that postseason, was that the most fun you've ever had as a baseball player at any level?
After the fact. Now, when you look back, you can appreciate what you went through. But during the time, it's stressful, and it's mental lockdown, focus, energy that not a lot of players have, even in the big leagues, and you learn to do that. I remember Doug Minkiewicz, he and I would talk, and you know, Doug played in Minnesota, had a great career there, and good friend of mine. I remember Doug Minkiewicz and I talked, and he had made the playoffs before I did, and he said, man, there's an energy level you can tap into in the postseason that you can't get to in the regular season. It's too long, 162 games. It'll just completely wear you down. You try, and there are games when you can probably do it. But he goes, every game in the postseason, man, I had this lockdown focus. And he was right. And that's the same thing that happened to me. That's why I was able to hit the 5 home runs and do what I did. But it brings out something in you that you didn't even know you had.
I don't know if you're aware of this, but you mentioned those 5 home runs in the postseason in 2003. Did you know that that's still, to this day, a Boston Red Sox record for most home runs in a postseason?
I knew that David Ortiz had done that twice, like two five home run postseason that David Ortiz had, but I didn't know if anybody had hit more. So I was aware it's pretty hard to do. I know that, you know, but I'm pretty, you know, I love that stat because, again, I remember what it took to get there.
Right. When you were with the Twins, not to backtrack a lot, but when you were with the Twins, you guys had Brad Radke, and for the most part, the pitching was kind of struggled after Brad. You get to Boston, and you are on a team with Pedro and Schilling. What was that like? Did you guys have the expectation every 2 days when those guys went out to pitch? And I guess Tim Wakefield too. Did you guys have the expectation when those guys went out and pitched, hey, we expect to win?
We expect to win no matter what in Boston. Back to Minnesota, we had Eric Milton, who threw a perfect game against Oakland, I believe. So he was a nice number 2 behind Brad Radke. We had LaTroy Hawkins on that team, who's an awesome, awesome person. And you'll hear me say a lot about that because you get to the big leagues, and that's kind of what you look at. Everybody's talented, so you don't need to hear me say that LaTroy Hawkins is a great pitcher, but he's a good person. Really, LaTroy and I talk every now and then as well. But he was on that team, and so we had some nice pieces. Jose Parra, like you mentioned, Aguilera. I played with Aguilera. Who Joe Mays was good. We get to Boston in 2003. Schilling wasn't there. He got there in 2004. So my story with Pedro Martinez is, and back to what we were talking about when I got to Boston for the first time, is I thought this is going to be tough, man, because they'll boo you out of the stadium quick. Like you have one bad game and you may never recover. And that was my thought. So I think we opened 2003 in Tampa Bay, had a nice little series there. We go to Boston. And Pedro starts. He's the first starter on opening day at home in Boston, and he didn't do very well, and he got booed. And I remember at that moment thinking, well, if they can boo Pedro Martinez, then I shouldn't worry too much about when they boo me. When, not if, when they boo me. And he got booed pretty good that night. And I remember that helped me, you know, with just thinking, you know, okay, that's normal, that's okay. Let's just keep going through this thing. And luckily I had a good enough year. I don't feel like I got really, you know, booed out of the stadium at any moment. I hit 283 that year with 13 homers, I think 80 something RBIs. I think that's right. So I had a good offensive career. I mean, awesome offensive year, defensive year as well, I felt. So it was a good year for me, 2003. And And so anyway, but I remember that booing situation with Pedro being a big turning point for me to start that year.
You had mentioned that iconic moment of Pedro and Grady Little coming out and talking to Pedro, and Pedro's pitch count, like you said, ended up being like 120 something. Were you on the mound for that
Yeah.
conversation? And if you were, like, what's the dynamic there? Because it's not just, you know, a manager coming in to take a pitcher out of a playoff game. It's Pedro Martinez, and it's against the Yankees in Yankee
Yes.
Stadium. What was that conversation like?
Our bullpen was sick that year too, by the way, in the postseason. I think if you go look it up, Scott Williamson, Mike Timlin, those guys, they didn't give up a run. I mean, it was crazy. So that's an element of that whole deal that you might consider when you think, all right, well, Pedro's probably had enough. But it was probably, if I remember it, it was the typical how you feel. Pedro, of course, is going to say, I got him. I'm ready to go. You know, I'm good. And, you know, he had, before that, I think we had 2 outs in that inning when they came back. He had Jeter 0-2 with 2 outs. And Jeter inside outs a ball that barely gets over Trot Nixon's head in right field. If that's right at Trot, we're out of the inning, and I think we're good. Barely gets over his head. He jammed Jorge Posada, like I mentioned. Sorry. He jammed Jorge Posada, like I mentioned. So he was making pitches.
Right.
The pitch count would be the only thing. Back then, it wasn't as big of a deal on pitch counts even than it is now, of course. And I don't know if there'll ever be another 300 game winner because it's tough for pitchers to last through 5 innings anymore. But I remember not, like I told you, I didn't think for one second they were pulling Pedro. You know, he's your best, and he still had the velocity, and he still looked the part. And so, but there's a couple elements. One was that I'm not thinking through that clearly you could have, and that is the pitch count, and that the fact that the bullpen was just unhittable that postseason.
Bottom line, did you agree with the call? Did you agree with Grady Little leaving?
I did agree with it at the time without the information I just told you. I did agree. He was our best. He was the guy making the most money. The velocity was still there. He was our guy, and he's the guy you'll go. You know, Stanford had a dude in the Super Regional against Texas this year throw 155 pitches, and that's in this day and age. So clearly, you can do it. If since he gave it up, now the question becomes all the things that we've talked about. But if he didn't, then you would have said it was Pedro, and of course you're going to leave him in there.
And then Grady looks like a genius for leaving Pedro in, and he gets out of it. So,
right. And then, but by the way, it wasn't just Grady's decision. So I mean, there's a lot of heads on that decision right there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So after you go to the Red Sox, you mentioned you played for the Cubs. Were you teammates with Matt Lawton in Chicago?
No. The only time I was with him was in Minnesota, and we kind of grew up together. So I still have a vivid memory of the strike year where we're in A-ball in Fort Myers, Florida. That's where I first met him. We were on the same team when I first signed pro and played for the Fort Myers Miracle. And when the strike happened, something happened with Dave Winfield that allowed the Twins to put Matt Lawton on the 25-man roster. So Matt Lawton's all of a sudden, when we probably had 3 weeks left of the season, and even though I had got there late, it's still a grueling every single day getting to the ballpark, something I was getting used to because I had just come out of college, away from home, a long way away from home. I live in Shreveport, Louisiana. It was tough, and you're just grinding it out. And here's Matt Lawton that gets put on the 25-man, so no longer is he with us. He gets in his car. I think we're either taking BP or starting the game. And I remember in that Hammond Stadium in Fort Myers, there's a street out in right field, and he's in his car and he's leaving, and he's waving at everybody, you know, as he's going down this street, and he doesn't have to grind these last 3 weeks out with us. And I just remember being jealous, going, man, this guy. I mean, and by the way, he's on the 25-man roster and gonna get a chance to play in the big leagues real soon. So. Of course, you're happy for him, and he deserved it and all that. But I remember that weird thing happening. I think it was 1990. What was that? So 1994. Yeah, the end of the summer of '94 is when that happened.
You ended up playing for the Twins, the Rockies, the Reds, the Red Sox, the Cubs, the Padres, and the Athletics. Can you tell me, you've shared a lot of awesome stories. Can you tell me some of your favorite teammates from each of those teams?
Jason Varitek was there wasn't a bad teammate in Boston. I liked when I think about teammates, I think of Derek Lee of Colorado, or sorry, Chicago Cubs, our first baseman. He and I were tight. Jason Varitek was a great teammate, but we had everybody on that team were great. Kevin Millar was real loud and boisterous, but he was funny. He would always say, like, I'm more funny when I'm hitting 300 than when I'm hitting a buck 90, but he was a funny guy, and he was the guy that could stand up and command attention. I've been on other teams where guys tried to do that, and you go, sit down, man, come on, give me a break. And it doesn't come across the same way, but Kevin was able to do that. So we had a lot of great teammates in Boston. Derek Lee, like I mentioned. I wasn't around San Diego long enough. Josh Barfield and I were good friends. And ironically, we played the same position. And I got traded over there as a second baseman. He was playing second base. So it could have been a situation where, he took offense to it, but he and I were close, and it was a great deal. Cincinnati, I mentioned another just great group of guys. We didn't have really the pitching to get it done, but we had a good offense. We had Ken Griffey, we had Barry Larkin, we had Aaron Boone, we had Adam Dunn, Sean Casey. So we had some nice parts to that group, and that was the one team in Cincinnati. I remember us getting together a lot, in spring training, be half the team there. And even Griffey was great, when he was around us. If you asked him for an autograph or you started poking at him like everybody else does, he would get a little, defensive. But just hanging with the boys, he was great, and Barry Larkin, of course, it didn't get any better than him. I mean, just awesome. If anybody had a son or somebody that you'd want to mold into a great person, it would be Barry Larkin. Just with the talent that he had, the dude is one of the smartest guys I've ever met, and good looking guy, so in the Hall of Fame. So I mean, Barry Larkin's got it all, right? I know a couple of people I'm around that they named their kids after Barry Larkin. My daughter's best friend is named Larkin, and so anyway, Cincinnati was a cool thing. And then Bob Boone, was our manager there, and he was awesome. Love Bob Boone. And so there's been some really cool times in the big leagues that I was around some really good people.
So Sean Casey, you mentioned the mayor. He was recently just named the hitting coach for the Yankees. The Yankees fired their hitting coach and they replaced him with Sean Casey, who does outstanding work on MLB Network. I want your thoughts on that hire. Obviously, he knows hitting really well, but that's the New York Yankees. That's not an easy team to go into and try to be a successful coach. He does have Aaron Boone, his former teammate, as a manager, but how do you think the mayor is going to do up there in New York?
I think he'll do great. I mean, it's more of a personality thing than it is actual technique. All of us know technique. Like you can teach it. I always thought the big league jobs are hard, period, because you got guys with groove swings. How are you going to tell one of these guys that they need to change their swing up? You can't. I mean, they're there for a reason. And there's clearly such a thing as slumps. And so when you go through bad times, there's little bitty things you can point out. I think the key for being a hitting coach is not to make it too big, just small little adjustments, have the hitter think about certain things that they may not think about otherwise. The best hitting coach I ever had was Merv Rettenman from San Diego, and he didn't say much. I always felt like they're more psychologists than they are actual technique guys. And Merv would, when I was told in the past, if I popped a ball up, that was a bad swing, let's go get in the cage for 4 hours. Merv would say, that was a perfect swing and you missed it by 2 millimeters and it went up in the air instead of out of the park. Certain things like that.
Sure.
Kid, you can hit, you're great, keep it going. Certain things that hitting coaches do outside of the actual, what people would think, which is let's work on technique, that I think makes good hitting coaches. And I think Sean Casey will be a good one. Years ago, Sean said that, and I told you the relationship with Sean and Aaron in Cincinnati. Absolutely. Years ago, Sean said they had talked about it, but Sean was working for the MLB network. He had other things going on. And so I don't know years ago if he, was interested, but now, and I saw that on the ticker, And I said, well, he finally came full circle, and he wants to get on those airplane rides and do the travel, which is another tough thing about the big leagues. You're traveling for 8 months out of the year. It's difficult. And Sean's got kids. I think one of his sons plays at Kent State, and so that's all things to consider. So, but I think he'll be a good one over there.
Do you think it's easier for former players to be hitting coaches? I've seen a lot recently, especially when Sean Casey and here in Minnesota, our David Hopkins, our hitting coach, didn't make it past AA. Do you think it's a lot easier as a major leaguer to listen to a guy who's played in Major League Baseball, who's got some experience, rather than just maybe a college guy or somebody who never made the majors?
Most of my hitting coaches didn't have much success in the big leagues. So I don't think
Okay.
that was a factor for me personally. If they
Okay.
said something that made sense, I would use it. Now, clearly, the wrong way to attack a hitting coach position is to force somebody to do something. I was forced when I got sent down to AAA in Minnesota to do some things. I knew I could hit. I'd hit my whole life. And so that wasn't the issue. The issue was being nervous, being anxious. The last thing you should do as a hitter is think you have to get a hit right here. And I did a lot of that in Minnesota. Once I relaxed, I hit like I'm capable, and for the most part. And so I don't feel like you can force people to do stuff. So I think for me, back to the whole psychology thing, I think whoever you're around, if they say things that make sense to you, you can use it, but it has to be small, little incremental adjustments. It can't be anything huge, or like Clint Hurdle always used to say, the enemy of good is great. If I'm all of a sudden doing okay or good, and I want to be great by changing my swing up, it's gonna have the opposite effect. You're gonna go right in the tank. And I took that to heart, and I knew that I could make one little small adjustment here or there and it would work. But the worst thing you can do is have somebody that, and clearly you have guys that have their own ways of hitting. Maybe it worked for them, it won't work for you. So you have to be adaptive as both a hitter and as a hitting coach. And I think ultimately for me, it goes back to what I've always said about when I first got to LSU. And I would have been wrapped up in all this, spin rates and launch angles and exit velocities. I love numbers, and I would have been all in on all that. Luckily, we didn't have to deal with all that back in the day. So my only thought, I'm not very smart, but I knew that if I put the ball in play every time, I had a chance to get a hit. So what does that mean? Develop a two-strike approach and don't strike out. Now, in this day and age, we've got guys striking out 150 times a game, hitting 25, 30 home runs, and they make money. And so it's a different deal now than it was when we played, which was don't strike out. And the reason David Ortiz got moved out of Minnesota is he broke his hamate. He was out for 6-8 weeks. When he came back, he wasn't playing every day like the rest of us. And to get thrown in as a left-handed hitter in the ninth inning against a closer in the American League, because that's the only time you're coming off the bench, was a tough way to live. And then playing sporadically every now and then, it's tough. So David got over to Boston, got comfortable, played every day, and did what he was capable of doing. And I think a lot of us kind of have that similar story. But I think that ultimately you got to feel comfortable, and that's the only way you're going to be able to succeed.
Major league players are kind of, I guess, known for pranks and things like that. As a guy who played for multiple teams, you said 10, 12 years in the majors, what was the best prank that you either got pulled on you or you saw pulled on somebody else?
They did rookie hazing back then, which I don't guess was that big a deal. It's not like what you might hear at a fraternity at a college, but they made us wear red Reeboks. And back then you had to dress up full suit on airplane rides and where you went.
Sure.
And if you were seen out in public, you had to wear not a full suit, but you had to wear a nice shirt with slacks. Sure. And we have these red clown Reebok shoes on that we had to wear for 2 weeks. That was our hazing when I was a rookie. But I don't remember a lot of pranks going on. We weren't very flamboyant like they are now. I think a lot about now they hit a double and they dance or they do what they do at second base or a home run for that matter. We didn't think to do that. So when I got on second base, it was all business. So when you were on the field, it was all business. And so I don't know that I even have a prank story that people pulled on anybody, because back it was, I guess now it's considered old school. We had our own old school ideas when we played, but it was all business. Like you didn't talk to the other team. You didn't fraternize. Well, what fraternize? One of the first times I got fined was fraternizing with in the outfield, because you run the lines, right, to warm up for games. So you'll run into somebody in center field, for example, running your line, they're running their line, and I'd say hi, and I got fined for that. So that it was all business back then. I don't remember any real pranks going on. Brian Giles in San Diego would do some things. I don't know if I can say on air, but it was we did some stuff in college now, like college, we did the military sit up, we did the some other things that just pranked other people. Luckily it wasn't me. But we had some good times within that military approach. We had some good times.
I don't know the whole story, but there's an infamous prank that Corey Koski pulled on David Ortiz when he was in Minnesota that all I'm going to say is it involved peanut butter in his jock strap, and I'll leave it at that.
I don't remember that. That might have been after I had left. I do remember one in Chicago. It was kind of a combo where, guy pulled a prank, another dude got him back. And it was actually Bussy, our weight trainer out there. I want to say it was his truck that they took all four tires off, put it on, on stilts or whatever, and left it in the concourse of the baseball field. So the tires are gone, and there's just this frame of a truck sitting on this thing, which took a lot of work. And then the get back was putting a bunch of dead fish in the trunk of the other person's car and left it overnight. So I'm not sure you could ever get rid of that smell. So I remember that happening in spring training. Spring training is when you kind of do some of that stuff, but I remember that with the Chicago Cubs one year.
You've played with some amazing players. Who do you think was the best player overall that you ever played with? Was it David Ortiz?
Well, no, because I wasn't. Well, he was starting to be the player that we all knew he could be. The year I played with him, I was only with him when he was doing his thing 1 year, 2003, right? Sure. So we knew. I think clearly after the fact, and by the way, he couldn't move a lot because, but he had some quick hands and a good arm and accurate. Yeah. He could play some first base. I mean, back then with Mo Vaughn and the guys that were playing first base back then, David Ortiz could flat out play. Frank Tom, whatever. I mean, every team had the big basher playing first base. David Ortiz clearly could play first base, but he's been labeled as a DH. So I think that so based on that, yeah, I mean, I think that the skill set for David Ortiz was as good as anybody I've ever seen as it played out. But at the time, Sammy Sosa and I were close and with the Cubs, so I'd do a lot of stuff. I'd do a lot of stuff with him. He was the best player I'd ever played with during that time because he just had the ability just to draw a crowd. The things he could do, he played right field, so he had a strong arm. Clearly, hit a lot of home runs. He would do the deal before the game where he'd sprint out to right field and then run around, and the crowd loved it. They loved Sammy Sosa in Chicago. So the way it ended was pretty sad, really. He ended up getting booed a lot because he was striking out a lot, and he was a sensitive guy, so it affected him. And then he goes to Baltimore from there. But Sammy was probably the best player. And I played with Kim Griffey Jr. I played with Derek Lee. I played with a lot of great ones. So it's hard to really pick because any given day, they could do something that you've never seen before. So there were some good ones. Yeah.
Let's do a little word association. I'll give you the name of a player, and I just want you to give me the first thing that pops into your head. Paul Molitor.
Veteran, just hard-nosed veteran. I know it's a lot of words, but he was a guy. I don't have any regrets in life, really. I mean, you just live and you learn and you grow and you adapt. But if I had one thing, I wish I would have picked his brain a little more when I was around him, and he would have loved that. He wasn't a guy that was going to come to you and offer, but he would spill over if you asked him. And I may have asked him once, maybe. I wish I would have spent every day around him picking his brain because he had been around and he knew the game, and he was He was intense, but he knew a lot about it. I could have learned a lot from him.
Matt Lawton.
Well, he's just one of my best friends, over the years, and the forearms on Matt Lawton. I mean, good Lord, it shows you how much of your forearm you use to hit, because he could some kind of hit some home runs, and he had a quick bat, and he could fly too. He could really run. So he had that unique combination. I would say he didn't have a cannon. Otherwise, I'd say he's a 5-tool player, and that's unusual. But he had a good arm. But he could run. He could hit for average. He could hit for power. He could play defense. He was good. He's a good one.
LaTroy Hawkins.
Another one. He just grinded it out, man. I mean, how many years he played? 18, 20 years, whatever he played. He got booed. Remember, I told you the boo story on Pedro. He got booed out of Chicago. LaTroy Hawkins did. He was our closer for a short period of time, and like everybody else, had some tough times, and they booed him out of Chicago. And so dealing with that for LaTroy and all the things that you have to deal with to last for as long as he did in the big leagues, I would say he's as much of a grinder, and the tenacity and the moxie of LaTroy Hawkins is unmatched.
Ken Griffey Jr., you mentioned him.
We just I mean, special. He could play center field. I think the confidence level, when we talk about having confidence at what you do, was another level. When you're talking to Ken Griffey Jr., he just knew. And I caught him later in his career, so he had clearly done what he had done. Won home run derbies, been to multiple All-Star games. Done, he had lived his career. When I got around him in Cincinnati, this was 2000, whatever year that was, 2000. What year? 4? 2000. No, that ain't right. 2002, 2001. The confidence level with him. If people could be around him and see what it takes to be that good with that much confidence, then you'd know what that level looks like. And the confidence level was through the roof. And we all know how special he was. When I played against him, when I was with Minnesota, we had a bunch of young kids. The payroll was way lower than most people. So we had a bunch of young kids at the time, and we just get beat up. But Seattle would come to town, and they had Butch Husky and Dan Wilson and Ken Griffey Jr. And who was the Jay Buhner in the outfield. I mean, they had a football team lined up.
They had A-Rod too for a while.
A-Rod was on that team when I played. Joey Cora led off. Joey Cora was the only normal looking dude on everybody else was like, good Lord. And at that time, it seemed to me every time we would play him, Minnesota, and again, young pitchers, young team, would play Seattle, he'd hit a home run, like every time, unless we walked him. And he had that swing groove. You didn't see Mark McGwire and Ken Griffey hit too many ground balls. Like if they hit it, it was in the air and it was going somewhere. Sometimes line drives on top spin, but most of them were out of the park.
Right. Just watching him, he's my second favorite player all time behind Kirby Puckett. Just watching him as a fan, he seemed like a generational talent. Like you could watch him and know, like you said, special player, not gonna, he's not a guy who's gonna come. There's not players that are gonna come around with this level of talent. He had just such a sweet swing. And like you said, wearing a hat backwards, his confidence was, through the roof, but he backed it up.
That's where I learned that right there. Hat on backwards. So see, if I don't, this is what happens. I still got my hair, which is good. I'm 50 now. But yeah, no, I mean, and along with the confidence is you don't care what people think. And whether he had his hat on backwards, he never stretched with us. Have you ever seen a cheetah stretch? So, I mean, he would walk out there with his bat on like a coach, and all of us would be stretching, and he'd just be walking around talking trash to players, and never stretch. I never saw him bend over to touch his toes, like ever. So how he didn't pull hamstrings, and he did have some injuries, so maybe that was why. But just unique person.
Manny Ramirez.
More unique person. Love Manny. he loved everybody. That's what I liked about Manny. Like I had friends come after games, in Boston, and it'd be in the back family room. He'd come up and give them a hug, like never met him in his life. And they, of course, thought that was the greatest thing ever. This you talk. I don't know if you can say there's too many right-handed hitters with a sweet swing, or at least looks like it. Manny had
Yeah.
the sweetest right-handed swing. What people don't know about him is in spring training when we got to be there. I think we stretch on the field for a 1 o'clock game at we get there at 9:30. So when I rolled up at 7, he's already dressed and in the cage. So he worked just based on seeing that day in and day out in spring training in the year that I was with Boston. Made me realize that people don't understand how hard this kid works, gets after it. And he was another guy that didn't care what people thought. And because of it, he was free to play like he played, do what he did, and people loved him for it.
The captain, Jason Varitek.
So he's got an interesting story because he went 4 years instead of 3. Back in those days, if you didn't go in the draft after your 3rd year, you lost all your bargaining power. And so that's why a lot of 3-year players would sign. Nowadays, I don't think it's that big of a deal. And you want the college experience as long as you can have it. And so for Jason Varitek, he went 4 years at Georgia Tech. I think he still was drafted pretty high. And he was a switch hitting catcher, best in the country guy. I saw him in AAA Tacoma. He was with Seattle, struggling, hitting like 200. When I talked to him, he was down in the dumps a little bit, didn't feel great about what was going on. I remember that conversation in Tacoma, and he gets traded. I think the trade was him and Derek Lowe for Heathcliff Slocum. I think Boston sent Slocum over to Seattle, sends those two over to Boston, and the rest is history. And just like David Ortiz, they allowed him to play. They allowed him to feel comfortable. And Jason Varitek went on and had a Hall of Fame career.
The interesting thing about Jason Varitek that I don't think a lot of Twins fans remember is he was actually drafted by the Twins, you mentioned, after his 3rd year at Georgia Tech, but he opted to go back for his senior year. He was actually drafted by the Twins in 1993, but opted to play his senior year at Georgia Tech. So,
yep, there you go. So again, he turned down the opportunity to play after that bargaining power year after his 3rd to go back, and that was rare back then.
Kevin Millar, who also has a Minnesota connection. He once played for the St. Paul Saints.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah, he was a guy that played all around, just this, I don't know, journeyman is the right word, because he was a good player. I mean, a really nice big league player.
Absolutely.
Played first base, could hit, power guy, big time personality. And he and I were close when I was with Boston, and for a few years. I haven't talked to him much lately, but we have mutual friends, and he's a guy that you instantly feel like he's your best friend when you get around him. And just a great, like I don't know if you sign guys and give them more money to be a good clubhouse guy, but he's that guy. He's the guy that you want in the clubhouse around everybody. I would say outside of the on the field stuff, the reason that Boston won in 2004 was because of Kevin Millar's personality and the way he talked to guys, the way he treated people, the way he pumped people up, the way he got them going. Similar to what we were talking about with hitting coaches, Millar was that clubhouse coach that would be a fantastic coach if he ever wanted to do it. But I would say one of the biggest reasons that nobody talks about why Boston won it in 04 was because of Kevin Millar.
And I will say, it seems like you nailed it on the head. Just watching him on Intentional Talk every day, he just seems so naturally just laid back, relaxed, cool, calm, funny, collected. Like you said, seems like he's everybody's best friend. Did you kind of know that he was going to get into TV afterwards? Like, hey, this guy's just got that personality.
I didn't know that any of us would, because you got to have the opportunity to do it, but he certainly had the personality. We went on a few talk shows, Jimmy Kimmel, and I want to say it was the Best Damn Sports Show before Kevin was involved with that host, Chris, Chris
Rose.
the host, Chris
Chris
Rose, yeah.
Rose.
So we were on that show before I think he actually, when we were still playing. And yeah, he had that natural ability to go out there and just relate and be able to talk, and didn't feel like he was ever intimidated by anything. And another guy that, you're going to start to catch a theme here, but another guy that he didn't care what people thought. He just did what he did.
Right. Pedro Martinez, is he the most he always seemed like he was the most intense player I ever saw. Like, you just watched his face and you could just feel that intensity just oozing out of the TV. Was he the most intense guy you played with?
No, because there's a ton of those in the big leagues, but he was up there. He was up there with that intense level. It was weird because you see all these guys on TV. And so when I was with Minnesota and we played Boston a lot in Fort Myers, we both had the spring training site there. And the first time I remember getting in the box against Pedro, he's not very big. He's not very big. Right. And so I'd seen him in person for the first time. I'm thinking, this is really strange. I guess I expected him to be this giant, and he's not. But when he let the ball go, it was coming. It had some fire behind it. And the slider was dynamic. Like, it just dropped. Like, early on in the big leagues, when you see some of this off-speed stuff, you'll think, I'll never be able to hit in the big leagues, because this stuff is just spinning and winding and moving and darting, and you can't even see the spin on a lot of it. He was that guy, and that's why he was so good for so many years. Not to mention he was accurate and be able to throw it where he wanted. So I finally figured out against Pedro Martinez that he loves his changeup, and he should, because back then, and we can talk a lot about the guns and how hard 102, he threw 96, which I think is the same reaction time as a hitter as 102 is now. So whether it's juiced up guns, whatever. So Pedro would throw 96. So he loved it. Same with Trevor Hoffman, 95, 96. And they love the changeup because they had the same arm action as the fastball, but they let it go, and it came in at 74. And so you can imagine as a hitter how hard that is to time up. So what I finally figured out is Pedro's not going to drop that changeup in the dirt, try to get a swing and miss. He's going to throw it over the plate, making it look like his fastball, and you're going to swing through it because your barrels are going to be gone and through the zone before the ball even gets there. And so I remember every at bat starting to sit on that changeup, and I'm going to get it at some point. I just have to be disciplined to let everything else go. And he'd flip some curveballs in there, be balls and stuff I didn't see anyway. I'm not going to hit it, but I'd sit on that changeup. And when he dropped that changeup, he was so accurate over the plate. You had to put it in play, and that was my best chance to hit Pedro Martinez, and I had some success doing that against him.
Just kind of wanted to end things with, how much fan mail do you get, just out of curiosity? And, like, what's your reaction to fans who write Todd Walker and say, "Hey, Mr. Walker, I was a fan of yours. Can I have your autograph?" Like, what's that like for you? How much do you get?
20 years later, 25 years later, I still get a ton of that. But it was overwhelming. It was overwhelming when you played, and they find your address and they know where you're at, so you still get it. But when you played, and I always felt bad because I'd want to do it. It's impossible to do it all. And more so when you walked out into the parking lot in Wrigley, for example, but it's kind of everywhere. There would be hundreds of people lined up on the fence line wanting you to get over and sign. And what they didn't realize is they all want it for themselves, and they just care about themselves. So they thought if you came over and you signed it for them, that would be it. But all 100 of those 200 to 300, however many there were, felt the same way. And so when you walked over there, which I did on occasion, you're there for 2 hours and you're signing everybody's, and you couldn't leave. It's hard to just walk away. Oh, come on, one more is what you'd always hear. One more. It's never one more, And so that's why a lot of times people don't do it, and fans don't realize it. It's not that they wouldn't be more than happy to sign your baseball. It'd be that if you go over there, you got to sign everybody's. You can't leave anybody hanging. And so that's why a lot of times I wouldn't do it. It was overwhelming. All of it was overwhelming. But I think ultimately you realize after you're removed from it, you're very blessed that people actually want your autograph and want to, have your name on something.
I asked Matt Lawton this, and he said there wasn't really anything weird, but was there anything weird or strange that a fan ever requested that you sign or that you have signed? No?
No, I don't think I had anything weird. There were a ton of different things, from pictures to books to, clothes to I mean, hats all the time. The thing I got a kick out of is they flip you a baseball in the stadium, and then they didn't have a pen, so they'd be like, as if I'm carrying a Sharpie around me everywhere. So we'd always make the little joke. Well, let me just bite my finger and I'll sign it in blood. I'd do this.
Yeah, right.
And bro, or the thing I always loved is if you're at a restaurant, they come up and they say, "Hey, I hate to bother you." And Nomar Garcia-Parra said one time, "No, you don't. No, you don't. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it." And so I hate to bother you, but will you sign this deal? And that becomes this. But when I'm talking about this, it's really cool to have a moment in your life when that happens, right? Because because now that I'm at home, I'm where I grew up, and so people know me here, and I still get a lot of that just because they know me from growing up. But if I lived in somewhere else in the country where I wouldn't get any of that, and so I think ultimately I realized that it's pretty cool that you had a time in your life when people actually would do those things, even though at the time it was a little obnoxious or whatever.
So do fans send you fan mail, and like what's your reaction nowadays to the fan mail that you do get? Like, are you happy to sign it? Is it something where like you kind of do it when you have time? You're happy to do it because you're glad that fans remember you? Like, what's your feeling on fan mail now?
Yeah, I think that's the case now. It's not overwhelming. Now it's not overwhelming. I get 3 or 4, so I can do it. And send them off, no problem. I hate that they have my address, but I think it's somehow they get it. And by signing them and sending them back, you're acknowledging that, yes, that's where I live. Not that I don't feel like I'm going to have anything crazy happen, but that's my only thought. Everything else is good. And I don't mind doing that. And almost always the people that do that are very cordial. They send you a pen, they send you a return envelope with the stamp on it. In a lot of cases, they'll send you money to do it. I send the money back, of course. But it's not overwhelming anymore. So I'm happy to do it.
Last 2 questions. One, if Todd Walker was Major League Baseball commissioner today, what's the first rule or change that you would implement to the game?
I think they got rid of the home field advantage in the All-Star game, right? I think that was one that I didn't really like or care about.
I think they still do that, but they changed the All-Star game format. Now, if it's tied after 9 innings, they have a home run derby to decide the winner.
And I might do that during the regular season as well. I think the Frontier League or somebody like that does that. So if you go past 9, all of a sudden it turns into a home run derby to declare the winner, because the 18, 19, 20 inning games are a little, that's no good for anybody. And so I think I do some gimmick things like that. Baseball's tough. It's hard for guys to make some rule changes because baseball lives off of history, and that's why we still have human element behind the plate. They're still trying to incorporate small little replay things, but for the most part, they've left it alone and left nostalgia there in the old school. You don't get to slide into anybody at second base anymore. We knew at second base and shortstops that you just got to get out of the way. So I never had a complaint about them being able to take you out. There is clearly some vicious moves. I tore my MCL. Carlos Lee came in and kicked me in the knee and tore my MCL on a double play. But even then, I felt like I don't feel like he was in control of his body enough to really know what he was doing. But you just knew to get out of the way. So I still like that old school way. I don't think it was the greatest thing in the world to have Pete Rose do what he did to Ray Fosse, in the All-Star game when he just ran him over. But as catchers, if the ball's coming from right field and you don't have a visual of the runner, you don't get in front of the plate, and that's when a lot of that stuff happened. If the throw's coming in from left field, you kind of have the visual of the ball and the runner. And then there's this toughness part of the catcher where, like, I'm not going to allow you to make me move out of the way. But I still like the old school version of that type of stuff. You don't want to hurt anybody, clearly. But the ability to kind of knock out a double play was kind of a nice rule. And I think as fans, they enjoyed that more than what's going on now. But clearly they've done it to the safety of the game and certain other things. And for me, what I would say is the armor that hitters use now. And I had to use it because I was a left-handed hitter. So my right elbow was exposed. And I got hit in the elbow not using it, and I can't throw. So it would take me out of the game if you pin me on the elbow. And so I had to wear armor. So I think for people that don't understand why these hitters are so armored up, that's a legitimate reason why you would wear armor on your elbows. And then your shins, man. I mean, if you hit a right-hander threw me a slider into my right kneecap, and I swung at it and hit it down into my shin, you break your shin doing that. So that's why I wore the shin guard as well. But the armor's probably got a little excessive maybe in some cases, but there's certain reasons behind it.
Absolutely. Last question, and then I'll let you go. It seemed to me like as a boy, I lived in St. Paul, Minneapolis, so I was a Twins fan, but I was a baseball fan in the 90s. It always seemed like every time I turned my TV on, there was a baseball player on a commercial, whether it was Ken Griffey Jr., Frank Thomas, Greg Maddux and John Smoltz with the chicks dig the long ball thing. Do you think baseball has a marketing problem now? And if so, what can they do to fix it?
It's a great question because I go back to the Pete Rose, Ray Fosse situation, but I saw something on the internet 2 days ago where they were announcing the American League All-Star game from back when I say American League, might have been National League. Those old school, Ron Say, it was the National League. So Ron Say, Gary Carter, Jack Clark, names that, when I grew up as a kid, and I think you're a baseball fan, so you felt the same way. You put these guys on a different atmosphere than everything else. Maybe it's that way now, but it's different. And so those old school all-star games, it was really, really cool to see those guys together on the same field, right? I think it's still cool, but it's different. It's totally different now. And maybe because I'm older, I don't look at these guys nowadays the same way I look at Will Clark, for example, who was my favorite player growing up. But I think the card industry has kind of shown you where we're at. I mean, it's not the same as it was. If you had a baseball card 30 years ago, it was like the most precious, asset you had as a 10-year-old kid. I don't think they feel that way now, but good or bad, it's just different. And I love the old school way of thinking, that these guys were just on another level.
Right. One last question you made me think of. Sorry, I've taken up a lot of your time. One last question. I've always thought it was interesting that suddenly Major League Baseball for the All-Star game had a shift where they wanted to have the uniforms for the American and National League teams all be the same, as opposed to letting each individual player wear their team's jersey. Where do you fall on that? Because I think it looks a little bit cooler when you can wear your team jersey and represent that team on the front of your jersey.
100%. Absolutely. I like wearing your own jersey because the fans know who you represent, and 100%. And your question before that I might not have answered, that's my answer, is like, if I had one thing to change, I would have them wear their own jerseys at the All-Star game. I think it gives it a little flair. And again, you won't see these same players on the same field on the same day ever again. And so it's kind of cool to see what team they play for, and the fact that they're all on that one field on the same day.
What have you been up to since you left Major League Baseball? I mentioned earlier you actually got your jersey retired. You're number 12 by LSU, and you're a member of the College Baseball Hall of Fame. Congratulations on both of those. But what have you been up to since then, both personally and professionally?
Well, I've been working for the SEC Network and ESPN for the last 8 years, I believe, calling college baseball games. We do studio work for a show called SEC Now on the SEC Network. That's been a lot of fun. That's in Charlotte, North Carolina. And just following these college kids is what I've enjoyed doing. At one point, I may want to coach again somewhere down the road, but right now I'm enjoying that job. I'm very blessed to have that job, get to call games. I've never, they threw you in the fire too. You just start calling baseball games. And so over those 8 years, I've learned a lot, and get to travel, go to places I wouldn't normally go to, and get to see things you normally wouldn't choose to go see, but it's been awesome. And so I've been doing that. And that's a short season though, right? That's February through June, and then we're done. And so right now, called my last games a few weeks ago, and now for the rest of the time, I got kids. I got my daughter's playing softball. We're going to Branson, Missouri, in a couple weeks for a World Series for softball. My other daughter plays volleyball. They just got back from Orlando. My son's playing summer ball in Baton Rouge, and my oldest daughter just graduated LSU, and she's going to go to Tennessee Law School. So a lot going on in our family, and just been awesome, man. Enjoying life.
Awesome. Well, you look fantastic. Thank you so much for all of your time and your willingness to come on the show, and for just making a Twins fan happy. Every time I do this podcast, I never it never fails to hit me that I'm just so thankful and grateful that I get to interview some of the guys that I watched growing up and playing, and that I considered heroes, and that I never thought I would talk to. So it's been a real pleasure for me, Todd. Thank you.
Well, me too as well. And I'm very blessed to be able to do what I do and talk to people like you as well, and talk baseball, because I can't bust out in a baseball conversation here in Louisiana much. People don't care. So it's nice to be able to talk about what I know best. But thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, this was former major leaguer Todd Walker on the show about the show. You can see this uploaded on YouTube in the next day or two once I get it all edited and clipped. Stay tuned for the next episode, which should be dropping next week, with another former Twin, Boof Bonzer, who came over in the AJ Pierzynski trade. We'll talk to Boof about that. Ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you, Todd. Congratulations on all your success. It's been so much fun talking to you, and I loved watching you as a fan, and I wish you nothing but the best. Thanks, Todd, for your time.
Thank you, man. Have a great day.
Yep,
thank you.
Absolutely. You too. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Todd Walker of the Minnesota Twins, Colorado Rockies, Cincinnati Reds, Boston Red Sox, Cubs, Padres, and Athletics. Todd was one of my favorite players. I remember when the Twins, when he debuted for the Twins in '96, he was a left-handed hitting guy. I always am surprised when I look at his numbers. I never thought that he hit as many home runs as he did, but he had a great career, and you could tell Todd's very engaged, and just a really great interview, and he's a joy to be around. So everybody stay tuned for the next episode. It should be dropping probably sometime next week, and it's going to be former Twins player and major leaguer Boof Bonzer. Thanks, everybody. Take care.